You know, when you go on holiday, you might go on holiday for 2 weeks, say. And during that time, you will typically get done much more than you would on a typical day of your normal life, working week, if you will. And the reason, I guess, or you feel like you've got a lot more done because you're doing many, multiple things. And unless you're one of those people to go and sit and lie at a poolside at a hotel for 2 weeks, and I'm not that guy, but unless you're that sort of person, if you're going to a new place, you're typically going to get up in the morning and you're going to do something in that morning, and then you're going to do something in the afternoon, and then you're probably going to go and do something in the evening, and you're going to repeat that day after day. And you might take one day off to sort of just chill a bit. But essentially over a 14-day time frame, you're going to be doing way more than you would on a typical day. And so what happens is you come back from your holiday and you feel like you've had more than 2 weeks. You've compressed so many things into a 2-week time frame. You know, if you've gone, okay, so you're in Canada, let's say you've gone on it's getting a bit chilly for you, so you decide to head down to Mexico or something, and in 2 weeks' time, you're going to trip all around, and you're going to do all these things, and you're going to come back and you're going to feel like, wow, that 2 week time frame, you had so many things that are done. And in the last 6 months, we've basically had that kind of an environment where the types of things that would have ordinarily accounted for a significant event or accounted as a significant event in any other year have just been compressed. So we could pick almost anything that happened within a month or even a week time frame. And if that had happened at any previous year within the decade prior to 2020, it would have been of significance, and it would be something that markets and participants would have looked at and said, wow, do you remember that? And that was, might not have been massive, but it was fairly significant. And we've had those sorts of events almost daily. Yeah, so you have this sort of overwhelm of stimuli to your brain, and you're saying, well, what is it that I need to pay attention to? It's a little bit like if you and I went into the ring and we were going to have a bit of a sparring contest. Great. We need to focus on each other. We're going to watch each other's hands. That's it. Now, if I was to bring in 2 more people and we're all going to attack you, you're suddenly like, whoa, like this is just morphed. I don't need to just watch Chris's hands anymore. I need to watch that guy over there and that guy over there, and I need to watch their feet. And it's like you're in an environment where suddenly you've got a massive amount of stimulus, and you're going, what is the most important for me to pay attention to? I kind of think I need to pay attention to all of them, but in any one split second, I need to be focused on one of them, because that's mostly the one that's going to, be of most significance to me. And it feels like that's where we're at in the markets. We've had almost 6 months of multiple stimuli hitting us from all angles, from COVID to the subsequent lockdowns and how that has impacted markets, to government stimulus, to government interventions, not just in terms of stimulus, but buying corporate debt, for example, to rising unemployment claims. And, we're now at about, in the US, about 20 million at present. Of course, there's actually more outside of that, because there's a lot of government loan programs that are in place, which are ending at the end of June. And so those are helping a lot of businesses stay afloat, which consequently allows more people to stay employed as those expire. That is likely to see a surge in the unemployment side of things. But, so there's multiple different things we could then look at. The rise of Marxism, which I think there has been an opportunity for shall we call them cultural Marxists, to take advantage of a period of chaos. And this is it. And so that has sent much of the Western world into a spiral of insanity, really. And so we have many, many different things to contend with. And part of the difficulty is determining which of those is most important. And all of them are important, but which is, most important, and how do you quantify what they mean and figure out what you need to be doing with your capital, and quite frankly, what you need to be doing with your physical person, which is a related but different question.
I have a bunch of friends right now that have actually left the United States completely. They left maybe a month and a half ago. They saw the writing on the wall. Well, they're in very blue states to begin with. And they just left. They're like, this is too much. We're out of here.
It's interesting. There's, I'm one of the very few finance guys that has paid attention to or spoken about this neo-Marxist sort of ideology, and I've been writing about it for about 5 years. And part of that reason is it's a hot political topic, and when you call out something as being dangerous, and it's politicized, then it is quite easy to be labeled something, a racist or a bigot or a, pick your terminology. And that's really one of the tools that will be used by the neo-Marxists. It's very binary. If you do not agree with us, then you must be a racist. In other words, if you don't choose our racism, then you must be a racist. And it's actually, as absurd and moronic as it is actually quite powerful. And we're seeing that now manifesting itself in society. But so this is something that I've written about extensively. And when I did, I can't tell you, Ameer, how many comments and emails back from people who are along the lines of, calm down, buddy. This is, this is akin to young kids that are just blowing off steam, and it's a fad. They will grow up and get over it. You're just a grumpy old man on the porch yelling at clouds. Don't worry about it. And I'm an ardent student of history, and I've spent an extraordinary amount of time also reading up on psychology and trying to understand why people do what they do. Because if you think about markets are really just an extrapolation of billions of people on the planet making a decision what to do with their time at any given point. And so understanding psychology often is, I think it's always somewhat important. And there are periods of time when it's almost like the only thing that matters. And if you think about some of the most transformative events that mankind has been through, that is absolutely true. And if you think, so to provide you some examples, the rise of the Nazi Party and what allowed that to take place, both financially, which was essentially a very, very weak economic environment for Germany coming out of World War one, whereby they had to pay war reparations, and a subsequent drag on the economy. The way they tried to, quote unquote, solve that was with the Weimar Republic, which then decimated wealth even more. And that environment allowed for it allowed for a psychology amongst the citizenry that was open to ideas that would have previously been shelved and not considered viable, thoughtful, possible, or certainly moral. But under times of economic stress, people look for somebody that's going to provide a solution, someone strong. And that's the Nazis. We know what happened there. But you have similar things with respect to the USSR post World War II, and how the Bolsheviks, you think about the Bolshevik revolution beforehand, that was, again, similar sort of circumstances. Mao's great leap forward. There's become Pol Pot's genocidal activities in Cambodia. And when you study those, you realize that there's a very close interconnection between economics and markets. And it doesn't mean that those things will happen if you have, for example, economic stagnation or recessions or depressions or anything of that nature. What it does mean, though, is that the probability for something to come out of those environments is much, much greater than it is at any time prior. And so that's really where we find ourselves today, at the same time that we see this ideology that has been lurking and has been growing in popularity and growing in power for well over a decade now. And again, it's something that I've written about extensively. And everybody was like, no, you just calm down. It's not a big problem.
The people that tell you no is usually the people that don't have firsthand experience. I always find it funny when people tell me about communism. Like, dude, my family escaped a communist country. I'm not theoretically making stuff up. I'm telling you from the fucking horse's mouth. But yet they stand there like, oh no, your experience, we don't accept your experience.
It's different this time.
It's different this time.
I mean, we get the same with respect to, these this claim that, again, like I said before, it's a binary concept where if you don't side with us on this particular viewpoint, whatever the viewpoint is, then by default you're racist. You can throw out any ad hominems you like: racist, Nazi, bigot. Any of those particular things are thrown at you, and you see the absurdity of this, because you have these absolute morons calling Jewish people Nazis. And you try and, but that's how an ideology works. The facts don't matter, and they work really in this critical, what's called critical theory, which is it came out of the Frankfurt School, and it's sort of this Marxist economic. It's more than just an economic theory, but it talks about emancipation from slavery, and all these wonderful words like liberating human beings and so on and so forth. Much of the work is really just lifted out of Karl Marx's papers, and so it sounds all sort of fluffy and wonderful. But at its heart, it divides people into two separate groups. You have the oppressors and you have the oppressed, and there is no in between. And within the oppressors, each of the, like even the oppressors themselves, as they see them, are often oppressed themselves. Mm-hmm. And what it does is you basically have this massively fractured society. You create a society that is completely divisive. So to give you an example, today the oppressors are straight, white, preferably Christian males. So if you are a straight, white Christian male and you came from poverty and you worked your way up and you now have some wealth, it doesn't matter. You're a privileged oppressor because of your skin color, because of your sexual orientation, potentially because of your political opinions and religious beliefs. And so these people are the oppressors because of those list of categories that they fall into. That, of course, in itself is highly racist, but they don't see it that way. Now, it fractures in that, for example, if you're black, but you're straight, you're still an oppressor to gay, trans, disabled women, right? If you're a black woman, you're still probably an oppressor to gay, trans, disabled black people. And it kind of keeps going on and on. It's highly divisive, but what it is a divide and conquer system. And it's a system of revolution. It's a system of chaos and violence. And it is the same system that has been utilized throughout history, time and again. And when it has been implemented at any level of scale, it has I can't find an instance when it hasn't resulted basically in genocide. And that's a truly frightening thing. So here we sit today, and, I'm a finance guy running asset management company and investment research company. And it's difficult to find peers that are prepared in public to talk about this. They'll talk about it in private, but they won't in public. And there are times, I think, when they'll say to me, and these are friends, and I understand where they're coming from. They'll say to me, just leave it out. Just focus on the finance. Now, there are times when the finance almost doesn't matter because it's driven by more powerful things taking place. And so, for example, was the coming to power of the Bolsheviks important as an economic event? Fuck yeah. More important than anything any central bank ever did. More important than unemployment number. Like, it didn't matter. It was the most overwhelmingly powerful determinant of what was to take place and what was taking place for the next 70 years. So I think this is an important thing for people to pay attention to, and not paying attention to it is actually somewhat binary, or has the potential to be somewhat binary.
Are you thinking we're at the tipping point for? Well, I'm not American; I'm Canadian, and Canada's more. It's a weird country, as in it's more or less all immigrants that escaped majority of these countries, of Marxist countries. Like, you look at our immigrants, it's post-USSR, China, former Yugoslavia, Ukraine. So a lot of them had firsthand experience in a Marxist communist country. And even though we're fairly left-leaning on socialist policies in the country, the zeitgeist of the people, more or less, isn't quite as crazy as what we're seeing in the United States. Like, we're not having riots, we're not having crazy protests, etc. Maybe it will happen, I don't know. It's just not happening at the moment. Now, what I'm interested in the United States, if we look at the examples that you mentioned, we look at the Bolsheviks, we look at Mao Zedong, even we look at Tito in Yugoslavia. We look at all these countries that had this quote unquote Marxist revolution of oppressed versus oppressor. One thing that they had all in common, the people that they're going after had no means of protection. They weren't really armed whatsoever. That's that one X factor in the United States. You have small towns in the United States that have more or less a militia. They have, you name it. It's like literally a mini army. So, and people forget, United States technically isn't a nation. It's technically a republic. It's a federation of states that agreed upon a certain charter in the Constitution, and the states have superseding power over the Fed, at least for now, as it is. And so I'm kind of interested because that's kind of the X factor. There's also mentality. You have down south, crazy red states, and they're more on the, I guess you can call it, conservative side of things, whatever that means these days. And so I'm fascinated to see how that plays out. I don't know. What do you think? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, if we stick with the United States, I think that the probability right now for civil war is actually higher than the probability for not having civil war. I fully realize that that may sound like a sort of hyperbolic statement, and I'm not here to make those, but simply consider the evidence. So we have a partisan structure within the country that is, to the extent that we've never seen it before. There is no dialogue to be had. We can see that with the news media, which has helped feed this. On the right side of things, you've got sort of Fox News, and then you've got CNN on the left, and there is no desire to sort of bridge that gap at all. It is purely there to. It's a little bit like when you go to a football game or a hockey game. You're in Canada, so it's a hockey game, right?
Yeah.
And it's like there is possibly a small percentage of actual supporters in the crowd, or maybe it's not so much even supporters. People just there for a game and they want to watch a cool game, and they don't really mind who wins. They just want to have a good time. But then you have the ardent supporters, right? And they've got all of the regalia, they've got the caps, and they're like, that's their team, and they follow them and they support them. And for those participants in the crowd, they only want to win, and they're only interested in. So if one of their guys commits a foul, it's easy to just sort of, it's kind of part of the game, or they'll gloss it over. But when the other side commits a foul, oh my dear Lord, come on, ref, what is going, So you have, that is essentially what it looks like today across the United States. Extraordinary binary. And then I think it's been fueled by social media as well, in that you have echo chambers where you can follow, and I did a test thing on this because I don't know how the algorithms work on something like Twitter, but so I try and get viewpoints from different people, and most of the people that I follow are purely finance guys. But outside of that, I do follow other people just to try and get news flow from both sides. And you can follow someone and still not get their feeds. And I found that extraordinary. And so what I did was I set up another account, and I made it look completely left-leaning, right? And then it started feeding me all this information. And some of the people that I was following in that account are the same people I follow in another account, and yet I'm not getting their feeds.
You know why, though, right?
Well,
it's the incentive model of media. So they assume that you are leftist ideology, psychology. Therefore, the ads that they put in front of you, you'd click them. So let's say you're using your regular account and certain ads that are more left-leaning popped up on your feed, you wouldn't click them. That's the double-edged sword of social media. People think it's like nefarious. I'm like, no, it's literally where can they get the most click for the most people to fucking suck up as much money as possible from the users on the platform.
Right.
And they have no loyalty. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's left. It doesn't matter if it's right. Obviously, they pick and choose when it comes to banning people. That's a whole different thing. But when it comes to the algo,
just in terms,
it's bottom line capital. It's like, how do I make the most money from these users on this platform per day?
The problem with that then is that the byproduct of that is that it further channels people down into a particular echo chamber. And it further fuels their own biases rather than having an ability to keep your mind open and consider what the facts might be. If you go back and you think about what Western civilization was built on, it was built on free speech, and you cannot have it was freedom of thought.
Yes.
And you cannot have freedom of thought without freedom of speech. Right? Because in order for us to consolidate and form thought, typically we go through a process where we'll discuss it. And that will mold and shape our thought, right? You might have a certain view on gays. You might have a certain view on the dollar. You might have a certain view on the tech sector, whatever. And then you go about a process of trying to discover the ultimate truth. And we're never going to get to the ultimate truth. But if we can get as close to that truth as possible, we're likely to be more profitable. If I can determine what the greatest probability is for the dollar moving forward, and I position myself accordingly, I'll profit. So I'm not interested, or I shouldn't be interested in having a bias, because the market doesn't care what I think. It doesn't care what my bias is. It's going to do what it's going to do. And so it's important for me to try and identify what the actual facts are. So it's like a scientific experiment where you go into the laboratory and you put in some mercury, and you put in some whatever, and you think, oh, this is what's going to happen. And then boom, it doesn't happen. You go, oh, well, that didn't work. And you try something else. And then, you have this evolutionary process in terms of determining what the facts are. But you ultimately have this ability to go, aha, that is the truth, right? Because the evidence proves that it is. And so we've actually largely moved away from that experience, where today ideology is more important than the facts. You can't state the facts.
Yeah.
Or if you do state the facts,
we also see it
labeled.
We see it in the market though too. Like you look at what's going on with Hertz, you look at the Fed buying out everybody. You look at for example, the rise of David, I think last name Portnoy. He runs Portnoy, Barstool Sports.
Yeah.
And he got it right away. He's like, the whole stock market's rigged at the end of the day. And so you have a zeitgeist narrative of raw fundamentals, at least for now, fundamental investing or value investing, looking at the data, looking at statistics, looking at the fact, forget about it. Burn it, throw it out. It's non-existent anymore. And so it's interesting. I want to pull out of that and look at it from like a macro view. It's like when you can't find real natural price discovery, you have chaos happening all around the world, not just the United States. Exact same time, you have elections going on. And magically, when the election season's here, well, we can have protests and people can go out and they can vote. You'll see after the elections are over, it's going to be tightening again for COVID because they don't need the use of us anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that people, again, this is a factual thing. So I'm going to say something which would almost certainly get me banned on certain channels, on certain, and it's this, and this is factual. Anybody could look it up. Black Lives Matter is a funding arm for the Democratic Party. So if you go to the donation site for Black Lives Matter, it is processed by a company called, I think it's Act Blue. Yeah. You go to Act Blue and you scroll down and you look into that company, and it clearly states that this is a company which is a funding arm for the Democratic Party. So this has actually been one of the most extraordinarily, I'm going to say, well put together in a like a Fox situation, well put together fundraising mechanisms of all time. Why? Because not only have you duped a lot of people into fundraising for the Democratic Party, you've done it on the basis of dividing society. So you've divided society, and then you've put up this facade to say this is how you can help. This is how you can correct this inequality, if indeed it exists, and that's questionable in itself. But this is how you correct it. You pay money here, and they've managed to do this where, look, most people don't do any amount of due diligence on anything, and they'll sit and they'll take in information from websites, from whoever. And I always say this, like, just look at the facts, look at the numbers. It doesn't matter if you're looking at copper supply, any of these things. Just look at the facts. They are widely available, and they're not that much more difficult than listening to an opinion. But they will give you real numbers to work with, and then you can look at an opinion and go, how does that fit into this? Does that make sense? So when you think about the Democratic Party, for example, you now have people all across the world, pretty much every country, well, pretty much every Western country that is donating to the Democratic Party in the United States. That's a serious feat. I mean, well done. Now, so you're right. There is, as long as the chaos continues, this is absolutely awesome for them to fund. Why would you stop it? Why would you stop it? You would only stop it if you can win at the elections, in which case then you're like, okay, we're done. But here's the problem, and this is why I think civil war has a higher probability than any other outcome. And look, I don't care one way or the other. I'm not political. I don't vote. I'm not even an American. I simply look at the world through a lens, and which is one of understanding a lot of history. If the left do not win, we're going to have utter chaos. It doesn't matter actually who wins.
It's a lose-lose situation, whoever wins.
Neither side is going to accept the outcome. We'll have all sorts of calls about the Russians was the one before. It doesn't matter. And so if that happens, well, firstly, if the left get in, there is an increasing ideology there that is really dystopian. And I'm not sure people fully understand what that can look like. At the far end of the spectrum, it is your extreme left who are calling for reparations, and by reparations, it's basically just theft. They're going to go and steal from whoever has money. It doesn't matter, and it won't matter if you were black and disabled, and a black disabled woman. It won't matter because they will manage to channel that into some sort of privilege or siding with the enemy, if you will. Again, all people need to do is they need to go and read some history.
Yeah,
that's exactly how Miles China came about. And so,
well, I'll tell you a story in Yugoslavia. So we were originally sided with Stalin, and publicly you had to make your allegiance. Stalin, Russia, blah blah blah. And overnight, Tito wants to break away from Stalin. So all the people who are public, sided with Stalin, overnight the zeitgeist switches. And you know what happened to those people? They're gone.
Disappeared.
So, like, people don't get this, man. All these people out there who think
they don't understand.
They really don't understand it, and they're but what's the saying? Yuri says, useful idiots. They are pawns in a greater scheme for people who are controlling them for their means.
Nassim Taleb, yeah. Look, we're seeing this taking place. The first call to action, if you will, is to join our cause. And at the moment, the siren call for that is Black Lives Matter. Okay. Now, just to be clear, I don't know any single person who thinks what happened to George Floyd was right. Not a single person.
Yep.
Everybody knows that was murder, or believes it to be murder. It seemed self-evident from the videos. And I don't know anybody that thinks it should have been anything, that there shouldn't be anything other than justice served. Okay. Now, that's not what this is about. That's not at all what this is about. And it's taken on, like I said, the left has used this as a tool to drive their own dogmatic views further. Now, to your point, which you talked about siding with Stalin and then Tito coming in, if you go and you look at what Mao's China, for example, what they did, they started off with the Red Guard, which was the young student activists, and they picked on particular people that they deemed to be the bourgeoisie, the elitists, and they made them join the cause. They said, are you with the cause? And they shamed them until they corrected their views, if you will. Okay. And that was the first step. The other thing that they did was they took any symbols and they destroyed those symbols. So they went through people's homes, and if they had anything, like there was the textbooks, and there was the intellectual, anything that could be related to the intellectual was torn down. It was there was the four olds, I think they called it. So there was religion, there was what was the other? There were artifacts which were deemed to be old, and they were creating a new China. Anyway, so they went through, destroying all of those things. And then the next technique, or the next step in that process, was they got those who, say if it was a university professor or something of that nature, they got them to out somebody else within that organization.
Yep.
You needed to go and guilt somebody and find somebody that was guilty of this. And I could almost use the word privilege. It's the same thing. And that's exactly what's happening today. So there are people being called out. It started off with, all the virtue signaling celebs saying, "Oh, I'm with Black Lives Matter," right? Not really understanding that they're actually just siding with the Democratic Party. Maybe they do. That's fine. But then it should be better to say, "I am siding with the Democratic Party." But they didn't. They used this facade. Again, many of them unwittingly probably brought into it. And so then the next step, and we've already moved into this, is that if you do not say anything, you are now racist. What's the hashtag? Silence is violence, right? So by keeping silent, you are deemed to be racist. I had a phone call with a very good friend of mine over in the US, and I won't use his name because it's not really important, and I don't want to bring attention to him. But his wife is works. She's a hotshot lawyer, basically, about 200 employees. One of the employees, been with them for 25 years, happens to be black. Texts her and says, Your silence on this matter is incredibly disturbing. What are you going to do about it? So imagine this. Now, for starters, it's an employee, right? He's trying to guilt her into championing this cause.
Yep.
And it's like, what do you want me to say? I'm not racist? No, that's not what they want you to say. They want you to want you to say, I'm so sorry for being white and privileged. That's what they want you to say. Whether it's true or not, they want you to say it. And if you don't, they'll shame you into it. And so that's exactly the same methodology that was utilized by in the Great Leap Forward. Today, it's just simply the terminology is white privileged, silence is violence, all these other popular terms that they're using. But it's the same. It's the exact same thing. And you know, you're the same. I mean, you're getting this now on social media. You've got basically Twitter Robespierres, and they just move from discipline to discipline, torching people's reputation and jobs. We've seen the multiple situations with CEOs of companies where if they've dared to say anything that could be deemed to be controversial, they're outed. They're kicked out of their jobs. If you're a professor that is at any of these universities, you're kicked out of the job. There was a brilliant article that was written by a professor that was confirmed the validity of this, written as an anonymous letter because he feared for losing his job, who happened to be a person of color. Not that should matter. And stating that the entire, that this is incredibly dangerous and that it is not representative of what many people think. But if you stand up and say, no, I don't agree with that, you will lose your job. And it comes back to Nassim Taleb's excellent works. He wrote an article, was part of one of his books, which talks about the dictatorship of the intolerant minority.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not about the majority of people thinking anything. It's just that those who do are so intolerant to any other views that they rule. It's a little bit like if you and I walked into a bar, and there's 20 people in the bar, and there's one guy in there, and he could be like skinny and like on any ordinary day we wouldn't fear him. We'd be able to, if he became violent with us, we could probably deal with him adequately. But he's absolutely wild. Maybe he's on drugs,
mm-hmm.
but he's just not right, and he's acting extremely dangerously. What do? We just give him a wide berth. We're like, whoa, because we don't know what he's capable of. We don't know if he actually cares about his own body and his own safety. That's normally what happens, right? I don't want to get hurt. You don't want to get hurt. So that stops us from fighting largely. Now, if I really don't care, then I'm much more dangerous to you. Yeah. So that's the intolerant minority. It's like they can have that one guy in the bar who will he will dominate that space. Why? Because nobody's prepared to take him on, because they don't know how his reaction is going to be asymmetric. Mm-hmm. They might say something that just fucking triggers him, boom, and he's off. And his reaction is extraordinary. And that's essentially what you have today. It's this trigger, trigger warned, and so you say something that people, like, violence is now simply offending somebody. And so, again, I've written about this for years, saying that this is extraordinarily dangerous. This is where it leads to. And so you, at the beginning of this podcast, you said, is this the tipping point? And I think we've passed the tipping point. I think we've crossed the Rubicon. There is no going back from this. In order to stop something like this in history, it takes extraordinary blunt force. Now, I don't see that. I don't see that coming. I don't see people standing up to this. On the contrary, I just see, largely in the Western world, people acquiescing to it. We just had, for instance, so we've seen the toppling of monuments. Again, that's exactly what we saw in Mao's China, right?
Mao's China, recently in Afghanistan with the Mujahideen, the Taliban.
Yeah. It's the same.
It's a cycle, yeah.
It's a cycle. And people seem to be myopically looking at it going, no, this is something else. It's like, no, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Mm-hmm. And so I don't see anybody standing up to it. For instance, because the next step is quote unquote reparations. Okay. And then if you refuse that, so the following step after that, if we look at history, is actually a purge. That seems far off, but history also shows us that this can happen blindingly quickly. That's how it happens. People, the intellectual class in Pol Pot's Cambodia or in Mao's China, they could see these things were disturbing. They didn't like them. They got shamed, and then a colleague got shamed, and it was all worrying and whatever.
I want to pause for. I think people really don't understand how crazy human beings are, especially when it comes to like mimetics or mimesis, as Rene Girard talks about. In Pol Pot's in Cambodia, not too many people know. I think more people need to understand the story. Like, if you were wearing fucking glasses, yes, they thought you were above them. They were Cambodia was so bad, they destroyed a generation. Everybody was illiterate. All the people that had any intelligence either were killed or they left the country. Literally a 60 to 70 year span of anything productive to move a nation forward, obsolete, gone. It was the massacre. It's really fucked up what happened over there.
Yeah, I've spent quite a bit of time in Cambodia, and there's nobody basically over the age of 40 in the country. It's incredible. And what you get is this massive dearth of expertise as well. You think about it, as you're growing up, even in your 20s, you will look to your not to your peers necessarily, but you'll look to those older than you for advice, running a business, playing sport, dealing with relationships, all the things that make life. You're often and it might not be your father or your mother or your uncle, but it's somebody that fits into that space. It might just be somebody that you become friendly with, whatever. But there's this depth of expertise and knowledge and experience that generations tap into. And that just got wiped out. It was gone. And it's been devastating for the country. But to your point, people don't understand the extremities that this will go to. At the moment, they're saying, well, it's just about, racism. And it's not. It's really not. If you look through, so Lloyd's of London just broke down on this and have said that they're going to pay reparations for slavery. Do you know why? One of the founders of Lloyd's was a slave owner back in the 1800s. Who cares? Look, if we're going to move back to if we wanted to go that far back, then it's not about Black Lives Matter. Why? Because Slav, which is slave, actually comes from Slavic, right? And that was white people that were enslaved for about 500 fucking years.
We were enslaved by the Ottoman Empire for like 500 years, yeah.
Exactly. That's right. And that's where the word slave actually comes from. So this entire thing is absurd. And if we're ever going to move into a situation where you and I or any person must pay reparations for the deeds done by our ancestors, then we basically go back into the dark ages, because that's what you had.
How do these reparations work? For who? Everybody? Like this is, where do you end? Like, what about the reparations for the original Aborigines of the land? What about them? What about reparations beyond that? So like, it's for me, I look at semantics and optics. So Lloyd's of London, from a virtue signaling point of view, makes this statement: we shall be doing reparation. I'm like, okay. They want us to believe that they're on the side of the virtuous, of the good. But then for me, I looked at it as more kind of a judo move. That is what they want us to see, like a poker hand card. Like, what is the real motives? Like, are they positioning themselves to benefit from this? Like, how are they capitalizing on this situation? It's not simple black and white where it's like, we're just going to give some random people money.
Well, again, if we look at what happened in history, it was the idea, it's largely self-preservation. It's trying to front-run self-preservation. So what you'll do is you'll say, before they come at me, I'm going to stand up and go, it's okay. We agree with you guys. We're going to give you some money in the hope that they will go away.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't work like that. If you feed a dog, it's going to keep coming back for more. And if that dog's successful in getting food, it's going to keep coming. So what we have now is this collective snowball where everybody's feeding this animal. To think that they're going to stop is absurd. They won't. If you're successful in something, why would you ever stop? It doesn't work like that. So, but that is often why people are doing this, is because there is a belief that by siding with that ideology, they will leave you alone to some extent. And so that's what you do, hoping that that's going to actually help things, but it's not. So, but the whole shaming thing is extraordinary, because it's literally what has happened time and time again. So that's coming back to what we're talking about before with respect to the markets. This, I think, is equally as important as any time in the past when you had the Bolsheviks coming to power, when you had Tito, when you had Mao's Great Leap Forward.
So if you look at these examples, and we're going to wrap up a little bit soon, we're coming up with an hour over here, and you look at the macro, not the micro perspective, and you see a couple of theories like Brett Johnson talks about, the milkshake theory, liquidity crunch, the US dollar sucks up all liquidity around the world. We see gold is not really breaking out yet, but you see pressure building up for people looking for gold. You see the stock market, which is not really price discovery per se. Fed just said, hey, we're just going to keep on printing. Well, we're going to buy bonds. We're going to buy equities. As much money as you need. We'll just keep on printing. Seems like we're entering MMT right now. So from a historical perspective, Even it can be from the Great Depression, so not even that too long ago. Is this still the classical golden standard? No pun intended. Is like from a macro perspective, it just hedge your bet on gold while all chaos happens. And like for me, I kind of find to see it very difficult from maybe hedge fund or quant trading, but I find it difficult for any price discovery right now in the market.
No, that's the issue. Price discovery is gone. The ability to actually, because what are the tools you're going to use? Unless you're short-term trading on momentum, you're fresh out of luck. Because look, we've shut down the world, literally. Parts of it are opening now. There are globally over 300 million people unemployed due to the government lockdowns. Okay. That's before they started torching half the cities in the US. And we're about just under 15% off the highs.
Mm-hmm.
As Howard Marks recently penned in one of his letters, it seems like we're a bit more screwed up than 15%. and so what is the disconnect there? The disconnect there is central bank intervention in order to prop this up. So in Europe, they're buying up. Europe, they own about 40% of all corporate debt, junk bonds, essentially.
Wow.
They're buying it up. They're doing the same thing in the US. So now you prop up all of the corporate debt side of things, fine. What's the flip side to that? Or even just before we get into it, if you stop doing that, or if you continue to do that, but things still go south, well, you stop buying equities. Fine. Okay. What's the flip side to that? The flip side to that on the balance sheet is that all of this just goes onto the sovereign balance sheet. Okay. So we simply have more and more debts increasing. How do you service that debt? Well, you service it with tax revenue. Where does tax revenue come from? It's a percentage of GDP. What's GDP look like? Oh, fuck. It's going through the floor. Mm-hmm, so you have this incredible asymmetry that's taking place where everybody is looking to the governments and the central banks to solve this massive problem. And they're saying, yes, we are, and we can. The problem is that you can only normally solve these issues if you've got savings in your piggy bank. And there are no savings in the piggy bank. They're just borrowing the money. Everybody can keep believing that until it becomes inevitable that it is impossible to do. So it comes back to what we're talking about at the start. Western civilization was built on a scientific model. It was built on the ability to say, okay, we think this is possible, let's test it. And it either proves itself or it invalidates itself. We've moved far away from that to the point now where they're wanting to defund mathematics in the universities and they're wanting to defund science.
What the fuck?
It's racist. Mathematics is racist.
Okay. I never knew nature's racist. Wow.
Yeah. So, and this ridiculous idea that sex is a spectrum, for example. Again, fine, sex is a spectrum. Let's test it. Let's validate it or invalidate it. And you very quickly invalidate it. Okay. There are not 52 fucking genders or whatever they want to come up with. And you can't choose your sex. So you have this whole ideology. And again, I wrote about this saying this is a danger, but it's moved through into science and into mathematics and everything else. And they're saying, well, that doesn't conform with what we want. So if you have the tools that are used to actually prove something, and it's going to prove something that you don't like, then it makes sense that you get rid of the tools. So they're getting rid of the tools. The problem is those very tools are the foundation for Western civilization. You tell me how you build a bridge when maths doesn't work. You tell me how you build a 100-story skyscraper without mathematics. It's going to come crashing down. So
let me ask you this.
We've got the same thing in the finance space. There's this idea where this can be done. Now, it cannot. There has never been an instance in the world's history where you can continue to do this. So the next iteration in this, and I wrote a long report about it, which has been gathering momentum for some years now, is MMT, modern monetary theory, which is neither modern and nor is it a theory. It is just a neo-Marxist type of ideology around how something should or shouldn't work, and it will not work for many, many reasons I've pointed out. But that's where we're heading towards. And that, so we either take it to its conclusion and it just collapses, where gravity shows you that, yes, science matters, in which event, and by the way, this is not global. That's the important thing. And so I'm spending a lot of time looking at what different countries around the world are doing.
That's my segue question I want to ask you. Very, very important question. So you look through history. For the most part, everything is a zero-sum game. Capital flight money goes to where it's best appreciated. Intelligence, if possible, goes to the best places it's appreciated. And so we've seen through history migrations of people, migrations of money that shapes and forms nations and economies. And so for the longest period of time, it was the American dream, right? You lived in Russia, you wanted to go. It's not like, oh, I wake up, man, I can't fucking wait till I go to China. That's a Chinese dream. No. China, America, Russia, America, Europe, America, 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 America. American dream. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now we're seeing this American dream kind of fizzle away, right? You don't have that American dream anymore. But as you just said, for every yin, there's a yang. Is there other places around the world that have this environment that is more conducive and nurturing for people that have intellectual capital and financial capital?
I think it's a matter not so much of look, what we had with Western civilization was a wonderful thing, but it's going away. And we're going to have to choose an alternative that is less good than that which existed, but better than where we're going. Mm. Yeah. So to give you some examples, you think about Eastern Europe, where you came from. Eastern Europe today is vastly better than Eastern Europe 20 years ago, 40 years ago. Okay? Part of the reason behind that is that they learned some of the lessons of how fucking despicable and terrible that existence was. And so there's a zeitgeist there that's determined not to go back there. It doesn't mean that they've suddenly gone down the complete democracy, freedom of everything path, but they've gotten better on a relative basis. They've gotten better.
Yeah,
that's true whether you go to Ukraine, Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland. It's true across the Eastern Europe. Okay,
it's pretty broadly libertarian with a base layer of bribery. So yes. It's open bribery. It's part of the game. It's part of the process. At least it's open. Everyone can participate. Doesn't matter who you are. You can fucking participate. Yeah. And it's a pretty libertarian, not so much taxes per se. And you can do pretty much what you want if you bribe the right people.
It is a more free society than that which we're heading into now. And I wrote an article about this about 2 years ago where I discussed Western Europe versus Eastern Europe, in particular with reference to migration policies. Okay. And it is universal. Across Western Europe, they opened their borders and said, it's okay, we'll take in North Africans and Muslims and everything else at scale, right? Very left-leaning in that respect. Eastern Europe, every single country said no. And it didn't matter whether they were left-leaning or right-leaning, okay? And part of the reason behind that, very quickly, is that those who experienced in the West, the last hardship that was experienced was World War II. Everybody's dead. In Eastern Europe, it was the fall of Berlin Wall. That's not that long ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
And many other small
You remember
wars.
it. You remember it. It Berlin is Wall, fresh in your memory.
1995 Yugoslavian war, Chechnya war not too long ago, even the Ukraine war with Russia. Like there's a lot of micro wars that's been going on.
Yeah. Yep. And so there's a desire to keep what you've fought for. You're not going to give it away. The West's just giving it away with this belief that the socialist system that they've constructed actually is far bigger and more powerful than it is, because they don't understand economics. It's just a percentage of the tax revenues that come in to try and hold that edifice in place.
But there is one caveat to that, though. Like in Eastern Europeans, like whether it's the Baltics or the Balkans or any former Soviet satellite place, there's no welfare.
No. Well, that's a good thing.
Fucking non-existent, man.
So here's the thing, Ameer. In those countries, there's not a belief by the populace that the government can or should come in and solve any of these problems. We've had this virus issues and lockdowns. It's damaged economies. It's hurt businesses, and this is an East versus West issue. I'm talking about Eastern Europe, but the same is true in Asia.
Yeah,
there isn't a belief that the government's going to solve these problems for you. So what are people doing in most Asian countries? They've gone back to the villages. They've left the cities, and they're just going to hunker down, and they're just going to get on with things, and they're going to figure it out. So they don't believe that the government's going to solve the problem, and the government subsequently does not take on more debt. In the West, it's completely the opposite. The governments are just racking up trillions and trillions of dollars of debt, and they are being championed by the people to do so. What the people don't understand is that they're just sealing their own fate by asking for that. Because so there's the East and West type structure with it. You could literally look at Eastern and look at all the balance sheets and look at the trade balances. I've done a lot of work on this with respect to various countries around the world. And you can say East and West, and it is extraordinary. And so that's what we're going to see, and we're already seeing it, is a shift of political, social, and intellectual, increasingly intellectual capital is going to shift to where it's treated better. If you're a professor in a university in the US today, and science is considered racist, and you're a scientist or a mathematician, and you're going to be labeled as racist purely because you're following, logic and reason and mathematics, proven principles, you're either going to just shrink away and do something else, or you're going to go where you're treated better. And so none of this ideology does not exist in East. You'd know it does not exist in Yugoslavia. It does not exist in Hungary. It doesn't. So there's a fascinating chart that I saw, which shows, and this is just as an example, Black Lives Matter protests globally, and it was just not globally. It was was Europe, and it had highlighted the countries that had no protests, and then those that had one, and those that had more than 10, and so on and so forth. And you literally see this map of Europe, and it's just red. Western Europe is just red because it's like they've had tons of protests. Eastern Europe, nothing, or one, and they've been like a few kids in the street, and they just got bored and went home basically. And so it's what it is you have literally the DNA of the society, and this is discussed by Neil Howe and Strauss in The Fourth Turning.
A great book.
Which listeners should definitely. If there's any books to read right now, and I mentioned this in the Insider the other day, it is to read Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago, which is a bit of a tough read. And it's incredibly distressing, but it is so important. And the other one is The Fourth Turning. And then I would suggest also Animal Farm and 1984.
Yeah.
Because they are so prevalent in terms of understanding where we are right now. And this is the most important I think, time, not just in our lifetimes, but probably in the last 100 odd years.
It cycles. What I like about the fourth turning, they go deep into Jungian and Joseph Campbell psychology and mythology.
Yeah.
And we are entering a phase of, in modern psychology, they would call it the Peter Pan syndrome. Jung would call it the Manchild Syndrome.
Yes.
And what we see right now is majority of people, and you can substitute man-child for woman-child, doesn't matter. It's an adult body with the psychology of a child.
Yes.
And they need a mother, the devouring mother, the helicopter parent, to take care of all their needs, everything, every aspect of their life. Wipe their butt, give them money, or I should not, how would we call them? Allowance, give them allowance, protect them, make sure nothing happens to them, and give them this little bubble world. As long as you follow the rules, the mother will protect you. And they never become the maverick. So the ways to counteract, and so
they don't take risk. They don't understand risk.
They don't understand risk. They never grew up. Psychologically, they never grew up.
Amir, this started with the schools, for example,
yes,
where children aren't allowed to climb trees because it's too dangerous.
That's fucked up.
You know, but that exists across the Western world today.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've generated an entire generations of man children, as you talk about, or as Jung talks about. And so now we're reaping that harvest. And the issue, and this is, I was talking with a buddy of mine the other day, and I was remembering years back. This has been almost 20 years ago. I bumped into a guy. I was climbing Table Mountain in Cape Town, and I bumped into this German chap. We became friendly. Long story short, he was a money manager who managed index funds. And one of the major things that he looked at, and it always resonated with me, and it's just come back to me now, is he said, if you want to know what a country is going to look like in 10 years' time, go and study the universities. Because whatever the zeitgeist in the university is, those people are going to be holding the positions of power. CEOs, politicians, legislators, judges, you name it. That's where they're going to be. And if there's a powerful zeitgeist there, you need to pay attention to that. And at the time, he was talking about South Africa, and he was saying, if you look at what's beginning to gain traction there, it was this Marxist sort of ideology. And I fast forward to about 10 years ago. Actually, no, it'd be less than that. And I wrote a long article about it. And we had within the South African universities, it was, on surveys done, it was something like 70% of the class, or not the classes, the sort of student bodies, etc., that have been set up were all Marxist in ideology. Today in the US, not only is that prevalent within the student bodies, but in the professors, 1 in 5 identifies as a Marxist. Not sympathizes with Marxism, identifies as a Marxist. And so you can't undo that. You cannot undo that. So we're facing this onslaught of an ideology of an entire probably at least 2 generations that have been brought up with this sort of ideology, and they're going to bring it to fruition. They're determined to do so. And we're in the first innings, or maybe nearing the end of the first innings of that. And it could be a soft revolution, which just turns the West into basically a fairly fucked up place that's losers.
I wouldn't categorize United States as a group, because like I said before, what I think, and goes to your point of possibility of civil war or something in those, or something that resembles that, is like you look down south, whether it's Texas, whether it's Florida, whether it's Arkansas, deep down south is heavy red states. Not so much Marxist ideology, and they're fucking armed to the fucking gill.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, And that's why I think that the probability of civil war is decent. What has been interesting to watch, though, when you think about an invading force, you're either on the defense or you're on the offense.
On the offense, yeah.
And the counter to this is very much on the offense. Very much on the offense. Even within those, I mean, I'm seeing things on a daily basis out of places like Texas where you go, whoa, I didn't think that was going to happen. Here's what it's like. So when I grew up in Africa and I talked, you could see what was coming there. I was fortunate enough at about age 16 to start reading a lot of the history of the countries north of the border, which had thrown off the cloak of colonialism beforehand. South Africa went down the apartheid route and held on to a different structure for longer. But then when that went away, I was like, okay, what comes next? And I looked at all these other countries, and they all followed pretty much the same route. They all went down some sort of Marxist policy, and it took about 30 years. So I looked at it as like, okay, South Africa is basically just 30 years behind all these other countries. Okay, and that's kind of where we're at today. So it was very easy to see the probability of what was going to transpire. And I remember talking to people about it, and it was always the same. It's the same thing I'm hearing now from Americans in the red states. It's this idea of, oh, if they do this, then it's like finished. It's like we'll stop there. And it's like that line just keeps moving.
Yeah, the
Overton. If you'd gone back and you'd said, oh, if you had like cities on fire, like, oh no, we would have stopped it before then. And yet here we are. There are red state cities that have been looted and burnt.
It's very akin to like when Hitler took Poland, and Russia and the United States like, yeah, no problem, have Poland. You can have those other Eastern European countries, but when you got a little bit too greedy, but if you come this way to the West, well, then we're going to have problems.
And if you let, so again, you're dead right. If you let that happen, you're fueling it, because when you have success, you keep doing it. Like if you're running your business and you do something and it makes you a whole lot of money, you go, bloody hell, that was good. What did I do there? Oh, that worked. I'm going to do that again. You're not going to look and go, oh no, I'm not going to do that again. So I think that's important for both sides, because at the moment there's a success that is being gained. So to think that they're going to stop, unless there's something stopping them, I think is myopic. And secondly, the countenance to this is on the retreat. It's on the retreat. And so, yes, I do believe we'll have bloodshed, and there's going to be a clash coming. But the Zeitgeist is not, it's not a powerful, we're not letting this happen sort of thing. It's more like, we're not letting them come this close, which is a retreating thing. It's a here's the line. Oh, no. Well, here's the line. It's actually here, to the point now where it's like, I mean, I'm seeing this with people. You just mentioned Florida, Texas, these places. People I'm talking to, where they're like, oh, well, there's stuff happening in the cities. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm out in the suburbs. Already, that's your state. That's your environment. Okay. Oh, I don't go into the city that often, but they've taken your city. Like so there, that line is moving. It's like, well, we're not worried about the people in the city. If they go and they torch a few buildings there and there's riots and whatever, like, we're in the suburbs. We're just going to protect our suburbs. So everything is moving the other way. So again, if you go back to like the fourth turning, it's like the actual DNA of society is very, very different, and that doesn't bode well for how this works out. So yeah, I mean, I think that the US can splinter. I think it's going to have to. How that, and that's just going to be chaos. Yeah. So yeah.
So bottom line for people is study history. load up on physical gold if you can. Buy Bitcoin. That's the digital gold. And be ready to be mobile if you have to move somewhere.
Well, I think it's more than just gold. I mean, it's when you go through these periods, it's going to be a stagflationary environment, which you're already moving into.
Yeah.
And when you have that sort of thing, all the supply, I've spent a lot of time on supply chains. Supply chains are massively under pressure. You've got trade wars taking place. You have geopolitical tensions. And so some of the most asymmetric types of sectors are not gold's one of them. Because things like agriculture, energy, they're going to be huge.
You and I were talking about agriculture. I'm bullish, very bullish on agriculture.
Yeah. So those are all in that interim, and then as we come out of this, I think in terms of locality, where you're going to be wanting to have your capital and potentially even your person is going to be largely in the East. That's where the on a relative basis, you're going to be treated better.
Yeah.
Intellectual capital is going to move there. Human and sciences, you name it. That's where it's going to be. Look, and you're going to end up having this weird setup where you will choose a place that is even somewhat of a dictatorship or an authoritarian country because they allow other freedoms that make your life better. I hate to say it. I don't wish that, but that's what I see as being relatively inevitable, where you'll literally say, you know what? I'd rather live in Shanghai than I would in Berlin or because I have more freedoms.
Yeah, we're in interesting times. All cycles, man. Everything cycles out, and I just wish the best for people. Chris, I want you to tell my audience about Insider. I mentioned before, but I think it's a phenomenal resource for people if you want to kind of shed a light on exactly what it is.
Yeah, sure. So Insider was actually designed after the fact. We run Glenorchy Capital, which is a managed asset management firm for high net worth clients. And the work that we do in order for those clients, because we were doing all the work, we said, hang on a second, there's like many people who aren't high net worth individuals that can still utilize this as a service. And it's not just coming from, some crappy publication type business. Well, look, I mean, we manage this. It's an asset management firm, and then the research that we do on that is what we publish. And so then, and there's all sorts of clients that use that. It's everything from Joe Sixpack trying to understand markets through to asset management firms that buy it. So that's what it is, and it comes with. I write a weekly report on that, basically, covering many of the sectors that we're invested in. And then any special report, if we're doing anything within the portfolio, buying something, selling something, special reports on that. And in the community as well, which our clients, it's a Slack community where they discuss all sorts of the sectors that we're invested in, you name it. And then I do a monthly Q&A, so everybody can ask me any questions around what we're doing, why we're doing it, what I think about this, that, or the other thing. And we run through that as a live Q&A once a month. And yeah, so that's it.
Chris, I just want to thank you so much, guys. If you are interested in checking out Chris's Insider, it's in the show notes as well. You can just go to ameerrosic.com/insider. It'll take you there directly. We have a special offer for anybody who's part of Ameer approved audience. Chris, brother, always a pleasure. Really appreciate you taking your time out and talking about this. And definitely we'll do another session in a month or two. And thanks once again.
Not a problem. Always good to chat to you, man.
Likewise, brother.